Hello beautiful people of the world. Today I am going to be doing my June wrap up. I read, not that it looks like it here, 18 books in June. 18 books! And I'm going to attempt to try and make sense of it all and talk about it as sensibly and accurately as possible in an attempt to help you decide what books you want to keep on your TBR, what books you want to add to your TBR, and maybe what books aren't worth the TBR. So let me pop these down and grab my review book. Just before we get into that, I will show you guys kind of like my spread for June and a little bit of how it looked journal wise. So this month I actually started a new reading journal, so I was finishing off all like the artsy statistical stuff in that, and this book here is literally just book reviews. So that's what I'm going to be doing until this book finishes. I'm going to be doing the artsy stuff in a separate little one and then putting the reviews in here. This was from one of the Illumicrate or Fairy Loot boxes a couple of months back, and it's from Blood and Ash We Will Rise book review book thing. Anyway, I had I think 3. Someone's carrying a random bale of hay. That's interesting. Anyway, I had around 3 buddy reads at the beginning of the month, and the first book that I'm going to be talking about is not a buddy read. So I listened to the audiobook for Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secrets of the Universe by Benjamin Eliasiens. I do apologise if I'm pronouncing that incorrectly. And it was read by Lin-Manuel Miranda, and this was a 9-hour audiobook. I've also got some extra details in here, so I might talk about little bits that I wouldn't usually catalogue myself because I wouldn't usually put the page count. But this was released in 2013 by Simon & Schuster, and it's YA romance, coming of age, LGBTQIA+, and I adored it. I feel like a lot of people already know what this book is about, especially because it's kind of been given a new lease of life as a sequel has come out recently. But we're basically following the boyhood of Aristotle and Dante as they meet each other, they grow in friendship and potentially more, and yeah, basically living their life, getting to know them, their likes, their dislikes, their struggles as they grow, all that sort of stuff. And it was amazing. For believability, escapism and characters I gave it a 5 stars, and for world building I gave it a 4 stars, but overall I gave it a 5 stars. That's just a little bit of kind of the things that stuck out to me. I do take other things into consideration when reviewing books, like general enjoyment and that sort of stuff, but those little marks are kind of things that I feel like would be interesting to note on the video. So this was an absolutely beautiful story. I don't know what I was necessarily expecting when I was going into this, but it'd been on my TBR for so long, I knew I would generally enjoy it. I just didn't really know what I would take from it, but I took so much. It was so beautiful. I felt like I learned lessons of love and friendship, and it was just amazing, honestly. The friendship between the 2 boys as it grew into something romantic was absolutely delightful. It was just, it felt so pure and genuine and honest, and I loved everything about it. As in addition to that, the characters themselves felt incredibly real, especially with how they reacted to certain situations and reflected on them afterwards, such as, you know, boyhood, sexual identity, family, growing up in general. You had that kind of hothead approach to some things by some characters, and then more of a thoughtful approach from other characters, and throughout it all there was this reflection, you know. It just felt like, yeah, they're being teenagers, but also they're looking at a deeper level, like if it's bothering something, if something is bothering them internally, they're kind of picking it out and being like, okay, maybe I do need to talk through this. And that was amazing to see, especially with characters that wasn't so is forthright in kind of dealing with emotions. It was nice to see that kind of be installed in them as they went along in the story. So I have a couple of quotes. I will choose just like one to read, and it says, "I bet you could sometimes find all of the mysteries of the universe in someone's hand." So I absolutely adored it. It took me ages to get to this book, but I devoured it once I did get to it. Next up is the first buddy read of the month, and that was When Women Were Dragons by Kelly Barnhill. And I actually have a full review on this one that's already on the channel, so I'm going to link it in the description if you're interested. But I really did enjoy this book. I thought it was phenomenal. Great kind of storytelling, unique in plot, and the way the plot was carried out is fascinating. So definitely check out that review if you're interested in more thoughts. So let's move on to the next book. One that I unfortunately didn't enjoy as much as the last two was another audiobook I listened to, and this one was 11 hours in total. And I read Before We Disappear by Sean David Hutchinson, read by Mark Sanderlin and Andre Santana. And I gave this a 2.5 out of 5 stars, unfortunately. So this released in September last year. It's YA, LGBT plus romance historical fantasy, published by Harper Teen. So for believability and escapism I gave it a 1, and for characters and world building I gave it a 2. So we're kind of in like this, I don't even know really the setting, maybe Victorian-esque, that kind of vibe, but basically following a circus kind of troupe. A boy, his, like, I don't even know what you'd call her, his caregiver, his employer, who is like this magnificent, renowned magician, but he's the one that's kind of making up all the tricks, and they've also got a girl with them that is also like an apprentice, and they go to this circus place. I'm not even describing this very well, I do apologise, where they meet some fierce competition with this boy and his, well, actually his master in many ways, but he actually has magic tricks. So at first it's kind of like this competition between the two. The other one that doesn't have any magic is trying to figure out how this guy is doing all the things, because he's very analytical and he can figure out these things to make it look real, but he doesn't have the magic to back it up. So he's kind of investigating that, snooping around, but then there's a love story within it, and there's deeper plot within it about the boy with the magic's circumstances, and yeah, it goes into depth into that. Unfortunately, I found the characters to be really annoying, and it didn't help the fact that the voice actors for it were also kind of irritating. Like, their voice just didn't help relieve that feeling, unfortunately. It kind of reminded me of a cross between the Vine Witch trilogy and A Marvellous Light by Freya Marske. I didn't enjoy The Marvellous Light, but I loved the Vine Witch trilogy, so it was kind of like a weird mashup of the two. It also really confused me with how pick and choosy it was with historical accuracy. So I know this is a fantasy, and the author even explained at the back he kind of wanted to bring bits that he wanted to talk about, which I get, but like logically it didn't make sense, because they had all this like racism and like for the time that it was set in, but nobody seemed to be homophobic, and usually race identity and sexual identity seem to go hand in hand a lot of the times, and I just didn't think it was believable to have one without the other, or at least to have one so adversely like against and one like completely the opposite. Do you know what I mean? Like, it didn't feel believable, it didn't make much sense, unfortunately. Like, I'm all about rooting for LGBT in books and positive representation, but at the cost of other things, and like things that are so closely interconnected, it just didn't work for me, unfortunately. Yeah, so I just didn't have any connection to the characters themselves or the plot. I didn't really care for it. I kind of just ended up having it on as background noise as I did other things, particularly working. I do have one quote for this one, and it says, "It smelled of old coins and other people's pockets." I don't know why it felt very poetic, but I quite enjoyed that line. Next up, I picked up Rupi Kaur's newest collection of poetry, and this is Homebody. It has a total of 192 pages, and I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. This was released in 2020 by Simon & Schuster, and it's poetry, adult, that kind of vibe. So I've reviewed her previous 2 collections in a like whole video if you guys are interested in that, but I'll kind of wrap up my thoughts briefly for this one here. I thought it was another moving selection. I tend to enjoy her poetry quite well. It's sort of not easy in a bad way, but enough for me to understand, because poetry is definitely not my forte. It had some relatable content, but even the pieces I found that I couldn't personally connect and identify with, it still allowed me to see into Core's mind and where her place of healing was at that time, as well as her lived experiences just a little bit. So I still felt that connection in a way, even though it wasn't a personal connection to me, you know. She does have a lot of similar themes that she talks about in Milk and Honey and The Sun and Her Flowers, but I didn't feel like it was repetitive in any way. I feel like it still gave something fresh and like a different approach and another perspective of, you know, themes that she talks about generally. So I think it worked. I mean, maybe if you was to read them back to back to back, you would find it repetitive, but it was fine for my reading experience. There are some difficult themes in it, but it's not without hope, and that's something that I really enjoyed. It felt true for each moment. Like, yes, you're feeling at your deepest depression, but at the end there's still this hope that, okay, things can get better, I can have a turnaround, it's not going to be me forever, you know what I mean? So yeah, very uplifting in its takeaway message. Before we get to the next book, I forgot to tell you that When Women Were Dragons I read with someone that I met on TikTok called Talking Chickle, and she's called Lena, and those are the buddy read details in case you wanted to know. I feel a sneeze coming on. Whew. Right. Next up, I'm so gutted I didn't enjoy this one. We have another buddy read, and both me and Gemma from Read a Book Gem felt similar, I believe. We struggled to get through this one, and that is The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo by Stieg Larsson. I'm so sorry. I made so many TikToks on this, and everybody was saying, you're going to love it. The first 200 pages are pretty boring, but just push through and you'll get through it. You'll enjoy it. What is Elsa doing over there? I don't know. Unfortunately, 200 pages came and went. I couldn't even physically read it. I ended up downloading Audible. Oh, I should have a new credit this month. That's something I need to remember. I downloaded Audible with like a free credit thing to get through this, because I was literally stuck here, and then in a day I read the majority of it, and I still couldn't enjoy it, unfortunately. So this is 480 pages or 7 hours and 26 minutes, but it was the longest 7 hours and 26 minutes of my life, I'm not gonna lie. So this was a physical read and audiobook blend, but mainly on audiobook. So I gave this a 2 out of 5 stars. It was read by Martin Wenner, released in 2005. It's adult mystery published by McElhouse Press. So unfortunately for believability and escapism, I did give it a 2 stars, and for characters and world building I gave it a 1 star. I just didn't enjoy it. I think I'm going to go back and try the movie and see how I feel about that, because I can't even say the story generally interested me. I'm just curious to see if the movie does it better, because I tend to like thrillery kind of things, but a lot of the times I do feel like it's something pacey and exciting you want to see on the screen. Do you know what I mean? So I'm going to give that a go. I'm not even going to go into depth about what it's about, just quickly go through my thoughts. From the beginning, I absolutely struggled to get in and connect. As I say, a lot of people were trying to spur me on and saying the first couple of 100 pages are tedious to get through, but unfortunately I just felt like that was the way all the way through the book, even when I did switch to audio. I felt overwhelmed and confused by all the characters, and at the beginning you get this family tree, and I was hoping it would have played more into helping me understand characters, but I was more confused by external characters, if anything, and also by the fact that a lot of the time they would refer to people by their surname and then switch and talk about their first name. So I, in my head, kept thinking they were 2 different people, and I was just so confused. It was just a lot for me to contain and process, unfortunately. I was very emotionally detached to the whole thing. The plot, the characters, all of it, I just didn't really care what was going on at all. Had it been more focused on Lisbeth, who is the girl with the dragon tattoo, and had been more thrilling rather than focusing a lot on like the financial politics, that it was heavy content in the beginning, I probably would have enjoyed it much more, but then that's just creating a whole different book, so you know, you can't really change it, it's here. Unfortunately, it just wasn't for me. But yeah, I'm gonna say this is definitely a DNF for the rest of the series. I don't have an interest in picking them up, and I am in the process of what is she doing? Elsa, don't eat that. Hold on a minute. I'm in the process of trying to sell the rest of the trilogy because I have all the books, and one of the newer ones written by someone else because the author passed away before any of these were published. I think they were posthumously published. Are you gonna go down? Rightio, let's get to the next book. After that, I picked up Speak, the graphic novel by Laurie Howes Anderson, illustrated by Emily Carroll, and this one has a page count of 372, and I gave this a 3 out of 5 stars. This edition released in 2018, but it's actually an older book. I think it came out in the late 90s if I remember correctly, like 1998 or something like that. It's contemporary YA slice of life, published by the, I can't say this, Grew, I can't say that, I'm sorry. For believability I gave it 5 stars, characters 3 stars, but world building I gave it 2 stars. It's very like close contained, you don't really explore much. But this is basically a story of a young girl in high school who, or is she in middle school? I don't really know how that works. She's like 13, 14 I think, who has suffered sexual assault, and she's closed herself in, understandably, but everybody at school now hates her because it happened at a party. She called the police because she was like, oh my gosh, have I just been attacked? But they were all underage drinking, so the police came. All the students and all the kids and that obviously were like, she's called the police on us, we hate her. So she's going through school like the most hated person. She's also suffering, she's lost all her friends, she's obviously suffering with this secret that she's keeping inside and not really knowing how to process it. Withdrawing from friends and family. She also has a lot of stuff going on at home, and it was a hard read in that way. Like it's always difficult when you're reading stories like this because you know how true they are. Do you know what I mean? You know how people go through something like this every day, you know, every second of the day, and reading it is difficult, but also reading it I feel is essential. It's good to know, like, acquaint yourself with these sort of stories so you can look out for things like that. And I feel like even for me personally, working in an educational kind of space, it's helpful to have even more pointers and clues when to think, okay, something's not quite right with this student, let me maybe have a conversation with them. So for that point, very great. It depicted the aftermath of sexual assault to the inflicted individual very realistically. I feel like there's so many different ways someone's going to respond to that violation of the body and also the mind, and this was definitely very believable and that much harder because of it. It was definitely upsetting how no one stopped to wonder why Melinda had suddenly withdrawn, because she didn't, clearly at the beginning when she's at this party and she's kind of, you know, push herself out there, she's not always been this way. So why was none of the adults in her life, why had none of her friends that are supposed to know her the best stopped to wonder why she's suddenly drawing in? You know what I mean? It was upsetting and disheartening to read that. Yeah, but unfortunately, other than that, I lacked emotional connection with Melinda and the characters. I felt like you didn't really get much of them as people, beside what the story was trying to do. I did enjoy the illustrations, which was nice. I read Emily Carroll's Through the Woods years ago, and I think that was a 3-star for story wise, but the illustrations were awesome, so I did enjoy seeing them in this as well. I don't know, maybe if I had read the original, like just normal novel, I would have had more of a connection, because obviously it's an abridged piece, isn't it? You're not getting all the words, all the text, all the background that you would from a fully written book. I don't know, maybe I might have had a slightly different connection there. But anyway, a couple of quotes. I've got one that says, maybe I'll be an artist if I grow up. And what really upset me there was the if, because then it feels like there's this underlining situation that she doesn't think she's going to survive past a certain age. You know what I mean? Which was hard to read. And another one is, there is something about Christmas that requires a rugrat. Little kids make Christmas fun, and that is so true. Like, they just bring all the childlike wonder and excitement to the thing, don't they? So I liked that quote. I need a cup of tea because I can hear and feel my voice going crackly, you know. But luckily here's the one I prepared earlier. Okay, I think we're almost about halfway. We've talked about 6 books so far. So the next one is another audiobook. I feel like every other one was an audiobook. I didn't mean to do it like that, but I guess it helps break up the flow of reading, keeps things interesting and different. But the next one I read was Women Talking, which was 6 hours long, and I gave this a 3 out of 5 stars. It was written by Miriam Toews and it was narrated by Matthew Edison. It came out in 2019, published by Clipper Audiobooks, this particular one, and I guess it's kind of like literary fiction. For believability, escapism, I gave it 5 stars. For characters and world building, I gave it 3 stars. This one was fascinating. So basically there is a very small, I think it's Mennonite community, where many of the women and children woke up one day to like heavy bleeding and pain in their genitalia, and they were being told that, you know, they thought that demons had come in and hurt them and done awful things to them. Turned out it was the men that was basically drugging them and sexually assaulting them. And it's about these women now kind of meeting up and discussing what they're going to do with these men. Are they going to leave the community? Are they going to continue to believe the faith? Because there's a lot of conversation on why would God allow this, you know. And I've been wanting to read this for ages because it sounded fascinating, and I love listening and learning about the experiences of closed, isolated communities, and kind of what they get up to, what their beliefs are. It just interests me because it's so different to my everyday life, you know. And I believe it was based on real happenings. I don't know exactly, don't quote me. It's actually intending to be a movie. I believe they've announced a cast, perhaps, I'm not too sure. And I think that is definitely one that I would love to check out, because I feel like it would hit the screen really well. But yeah, this was uniquely delivered in story. So at first I thought it was strange that there was a male narrator, but in the story they get they describe him as sort of like effeminate men to come and do the minutes for them. So it's coming from his mouth, he's writing it down because none of them are able to read and write. So it's told from him but from the women, do you know what I mean? Anyway, that whole storytelling was quite interesting. He was basically recording the minutes and whatever they were saying and keeping a record and account of it. But unfortunately I lacked, again, an emotional depth to the story because of the method of the storytelling. So although it was unique and quite interesting in that approach, it also on the flip side was a little bit too cold and distant for me, and I didn't feel like we were accurately getting these women's stories because it was being told by a male perspective. Do you know what I mean? And also in a way he was putting words in their mouths because their vocabulary and understanding was limited in their knowledge. He was also translating because they spoke like an old version of German, I think they said. So technically, you know, he's changing what they're saying. It's not an accurate dialogue. So I felt like, oh, I'm not really getting the women's stories. In a way, kind of similar to how I was feeling with Silence of the Girls by Pat Barker and The Women of Troy. I just didn't feel like I was hearing from the women enough, you know. But yes, anyway, those are my thoughts and feelings on Women Talking. I have a couple of quotes, but I will read this one here. One is not crying, she says. She is moisturising. Right, back to physical books. I picked up this one that my friend Maria got me for like my last birthday, I think, and it's Crazy Cat Lady by Michael Powell, illustrated by Bryony Clarkson. Page count is 96. I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars. It released in 2019. It's non-fiction, adult humour, published by SJG Gift Publishing. This was fun. It's basically about being a crazy cat lady, kind of debunking some of the myths. Bit quirky, bit cool. It's one of those little novelty items, funny, entertaining, and more informative than I was expecting. I have a quote here and it says, "Sharing your house with cats can understandably feel like the high security wing of a jail, surrounded by killers, psychopaths, and general mayhem." How true is that? Back to the audiobooks now. I listened to another amazing read, and again it's one that I've been wanting to read for a long while, so I'm glad to have been able to kind of just put it on and get it done in like 2 days, I think. That was 10 minutes 38 seconds in this strange world by Elif Shafak, read by Alex Dunmore, and this was 9 hours and 12 minutes long. I gave this one a 4.5 stars. It published originally in 2019 by Penguin, and it's literary fiction adult. So for believability, escapism and world building I gave it a 5 stars, and for characters I gave it a 4 stars. This was a fantastic book. So we are following Layla, who at the beginning of the book her brain is shutting down. She is dead. She has been murdered, and as her brain is shutting down, it kind of counts down in minutes here and there what she's thinking. It's almost like, you know, your life flashes before your eyes, but she kind of grasps onto a memory and goes back in time, and you learn all about her upbringing from a little girl all the way to the part she is now, dead. And I feel like throughout it you're hoping, oh no, she's fine, she's gonna wake up, but then you have to remember, no, she is actually dead, and this is her brain kind of shutting down activity. So you know it's going to be a sad ending, but you still aren't without hope. But yeah, this was absolutely heartbreaking and beautiful. I loved the found family they call the water family, because you have your blood family and your water family. I thought that was so clever. I loved how each of the friends were introduced into the story, and how we got to see what their lives were like before they met Layla and also after. But yeah, it was absolutely beautifully written. There were some really interesting scenes because Layla is a sex worker, so you get a lot of scenes around the house that she kind of works in and all the people that she meets and how they've kind of collected together as this family. So again, a complete different lifestyle to what I'm used to. Is so interesting, so rich to kind of see what they got up to after working hours and during working hours, and how they found love, and just my heart, it just hurt me so much more because you know that she's not alive, she's not going to survive this, and it's like, oh, for God's sake. It kind of turned into a little bit of a mystery at the end as to who killed her, what did they do, why did they do that, but the story unravels and you're like, okay. Absolutely clever. I've got loads of quotes for this one, but I will grab a random one. I've written it so tiny, it's so difficult. There's one that just says funerals are for the living, and then another one that says never be ashamed of your tears, cry and everyone knows you're alive. I thought that was so beautiful. Right, definitely would recommend that book. After that I listened to another 2 audiobooks, and the first of those 2 was The Red Wind by Isabel Carmody, read by the author, and this one I gave a 3.5 out of 5 stars, and it's 3 hours and 45 minutes. It's published in 2012 by ABC Audio, and it's children's adventure kind of story. For believability and escapism I gave it 4 stars, and for characters and world building I gave it 3 stars. And this is just a fun children's story that actually had more heart to it than I was expecting, following 2 brothers, and every summer one of the brothers does this massive hike to like basically the market, but it's quite far away from them, and the other one doesn't really like the socialization aspect, so he takes time to kind of go into the forest and gather supplies that they'll need for over the winter, make sure they're fully stocked, and then he just does this big harvest sort of thing. But there's this red wind that comes in and separates them for longer than they're expecting, so there's like worry that they're gonna die. It's quite dramatic, there's some traumatizing stuff happening, but it was amazing. It was such a good read. Again, surprisingly emotional and distressing, but in a good way. I felt quite connected to what was happening. I got so invested in this like natural disaster red wind element of the story, because it was quite literally ravaging their home, and it was almost like, oh my god, how are these little characters gonna get out of this? They're also kind of like little animal people. I don't really know, they kind of, the picture on the cover of the book makes me think of Where the Wild Things Are, like that little boy in the animal suit kind of looks like that, but that's the little animals that they are. And there was some kind of discussion about what they were as well. Interesting. I loved the friendship and the brotherhood in this, and also finding your confidence was at the heart of the story, which I really enjoyed, and I feel like could be quite inspiring for young children. And the descriptions were really rich as well. I'm pretty sure it probably would have had some illustrations dotted in and around had I read the physical copy, but I was quite content with the audiobook. And then the next audiobook, unfortunately, was my, I think, one and only DNF of June, and that was Very Cold People by Sarah Munguso, read by Rebecca. Rebecca Lohman, and this was 4 hours and 21 minutes. I think I DNF'd at like 5%. It's published in 2022 by Picador, and it's literary fiction adult. I mean, I obviously haven't given it a rating just because I didn't read the whole thing, but I don't even know how to describe it. I think we're following a very distantly cold girl who grows up in a very like sterilized home, like there's no love really in there, and kind of her growing up. But I mean, I can't tell you much more than that because I didn't read any further. But I couldn't stand the narrator. It was just monotonous and dry, but I don't think it was just the narrator's fault. The story itself for me was monotonous and dry, and I don't think I would have enjoyed it anymore had I picked up a physical version of it. It just wasn't on my vibe, wasn't on my wavelength. The story itself I felt was incredibly tedious, and it just held no interest for me, unfortunately. So that was a DNF. The next book is the last buddy read of the month, and I read this one with Deborah from Hills of Books on Instagram, and that is Dreams of Gods and Monsters by Laini Taylor. Finally finished this trilogy now. I think we're definitely going to be picking up the sequel, The Strange, the Dreamer and the Muse of Nightmares, at some point, probably in a couple of months near the end of the year, I reckon. But the page count for this one was 637 pages. It was a 4 out of 5 star read for me. Published originally in 2014 by Hodder and Stoughton, and it's YA, fantasy, romance, that sort of vibe. And what an awesome finale this was. Oh my god. So for believability and escapism and world building, I gave it a 4 stars. The characters, I gave it a 3 stars. So I don't think I can really go into depth about the specific plot because obviously this is the last book. And I feel like a lot of people are quite aware of the general trilogy, so I won't go into depth about the synopsis, but just for very basic non-spoilery thoughts for this particular book, it was kind of up and down for me for the beginning 2/3, I would say, but once we got into the finale, it was, oh my god, the pacing was perfect. It was so action-packed, so much was going on, so much things were like high stakes, you know, and my heart was just rabbiting away as those final pages closed. Adored Ziri's ending. Chapter 85 for me was the best, one of the best chapters. This was like the last chapter before the epilogue, to pretty much the last chapter. It gave me like, you know when you're so excited your feet go all tippy tappy and your cheeks go all tingly and warm? I got that in that chapter. It was awesome. And I also really loved how characters have become so comfortable with each other that they had these like silent conversations, and the way it was written on the page, it just worked, because you know when you've got your other half or your best friend and you need to give each other the look and you know exactly what you're saying. That is what was happening here with some characters, and I absolutely adored it. So for a quote I have, but Susanna had the impression of a pair of magnets pretending not to be magnets. Loved it. And then quite a sad one, but in this moment they are, all of them, children of regret. Another audiobook. So this one was, well, I feel like all my audiobooks were kind of random, to be honest, but this one was very random. As I say, I had Audible downloaded, so I had a free credit, and then I basically was like, oh, I only wanted to use it to basically use the Millennium thing, but I couldn't cancel it because I was on a free one. So then I messaged them and they was like, oh no, you can't cancel this one. So I was like, okay, cool. But then they gave me like a promotional thing, so I only have to pay $3.99 for 3 months, I think. So they started that up for me, and then they paused it, and I was like, no, I only wanted to pause it because I didn't want to pay the $8.99 or whatever it was. So they unpaused it, and then I got my credit for the month that I paid for, if you know what I mean. So that was Arm of Sphinx by Josiah Bancroft, read by John Banks. This is the sequel in the Tower of Babel books. The first one being Send and Ascends, which I read a couple of months ago. It was borrowed to me by one of my colleagues at work. And this is 14 hours 5 minutes. Released in 2018 by Orbit, and it's adult sci-fi. And unfortunately, I gave it 1 star. I'm so sorry. I feel like this series is so loved, like so beloved. And the friend at work that loaned me the first book, like, was raving about it. That's why he loaned it to me. He said, oh, I think you're gonna love it, blah blah blah. And I felt gutted. That's why I didn't want to borrow his physical book, because I knew I wasn't gonna enjoy it. I wasn't going to enjoy the second because I felt kind of confused and conflicted about the first one, so I was like, let me just see if it's on Audible. And oh my god, I'm glad I did that, because as I say, I gave it 1 star and I would have felt so bad giving him back his book like, yeah, I hated it, sorry babes. So basically, for everything that I talk about, believability, blah blah blah, I gave it all a 1 star, unfortunately. And I'm not even really going to go into depth about the synopsis for this one. Again, it's a sequel, but briefly, in the first book, our character Tom Senlin, for his honeymoon with his new wife, he goes, I've got fur on my lip, the joys of having pets. He goes to the Tower of Babel, which is in biblical like mythology and stuff. It was this tower where all these people started building it upon themselves, and then God didn't like what was happening here. I couldn't really see what was going on. I can't remember exactly, I do apologise, correct me if I'm wrong, and he scrambled the language. That's why it's called Babel, for the English play on word, I guess, like babble, that kind of thing, like scrambling of words. So they couldn't understand each other. So the Tower of Babel is kind of, I guess, like in this world based off of that. But it's kind of like a steampunk Victorian vibe, because it's all like ahead of its time. There's all this machinery and all this stuff, and it's all different levels as you go up. And they instantly get lost, and as Senlin goes in to try and find her, he quickly realises that it is not the beautifully brochured paradise that everyone outside is led to believe. It's actually quite a dark and horrible place where everybody is brutal to each other. And yeah, so he's on the hunt for his wife that he lost, and this book is a continuation of that. So by trying the audiobook, I was hoping to get more stuck into this one, but it just wasn't meant to be, unfortunately. Although it did make me get through it far quicker, because the first book, it took me ages to read, I feel. It just didn't improve my enjoyment of the story overall. I still didn't really have a care for what was going on. It left me a bit confused. I didn't really know what was happening. The only thing that helped me enjoy it a little bit was the narrator. I thought his voice acting was amazing, and the different voices and tones that he gave to all the different characters worked quite well. Like the Millennium Trilogy, this will also be another series DNF for me. So I have one quote here, and it says, it made me chuckle, especially as I got my cup of tea ready. Senlin woke feeling like the tea bag at the bottom of an empty pot. Wet, heavy and used up. Just like that book made me feel, unfortunately. Oh god. On to something I enjoyed much more, and that was The Girl from the Other Side Volume 2 by Nagabe, and this was 174 pages, and I gave it a 3.5 out of 5 stars. This one published in 2017 by Seven Seas Entertainment, and it's fantasy YA, I would say, but it says for all ages, but I kind of think it's kind of got some violent bits in it. There's a scene that comes to mind that's quite violent, and I wouldn't give this to a child. But The Girl from the Other Side is, let me read you, if I go over here, I'll read you the synopsis on the back of the first one. So, oh my god, right. Once upon a time, in a land far away, there were 2 kingdoms. The outside, where twisted beasts roamed that could curse with a touch, and the inside, where humans lived in safety and peace. The girl and the beast should never have met, but when they do, a quiet fairy tale begins. This is a story of 2 people, one human, one inhuman, who linger in the hazy twilight that separates night from day. The direction of this plot really did pique my interest in what the insiders are up to, and kind of what they're saying is the reason behind the curse and how they're trying to stop it, and what Shiva, who's our main like little girl character, what she has to do with all of this. So the illustrations, although I love them, the inkiness of them made some seems pretty difficult to see what was actually happening. So I think that was my only kind of main negative, but other than that, it was another decent read. I very much enjoyed this series, and I've got a couple more that I've recently purchased that I'll show in a haul some point soon. Then we have a comic. This is The Sad Ghost Club 2 by Liz Mendins. About 2 months ago I read the first one and really enjoyed this, so obviously picked up the sequel. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars, and it has 250 pages. It was released this year by Hodder and Stoughton, and it's sort of coming of age YA. So the Sad Ghost Club is basically a club for all the sad ghosts out there to feel less sad or less alone together. So yeah, this was more about forming the actual club and kind of getting other people involved. There's some struggles due to that, because of like new people and anxiety that rises from that, and kind of how they overcome those troubles. So I gave Believability and Escapism 5 stars, and the rest I gave a 4 stars. So yeah, this was another great volume. I enjoyed seeing the friendship group expand and kind of the fallout of that, as I say, with the anxiety that comes up from like a bigger group, more people, more worries arising because of that, and sort of how that was dealt with. I just very much enjoyed this. So I have a quote that says, "It's like the tap is turned off and I'm just left alone with your thoughts." Yes, exactly. When that happens, it feels like you've never felt okay before, and that I never will again. So sad, but I know the feeling. I know the feeling. We are down to the last 2 books. So the second to last one was another combined book. So instead of physical and audio, I did audiobook and ebook. I'm trying not to limit myself on how I consume words, and if there's going to be a way that makes a reading experience better, enjoyable for me, I'm going to try and do that now. Before I was like, but no, how do I categorize it? If it's an ebook but then I listen to it, how does that work? I just need to stop getting in my head about that. It really doesn't matter. It's really not that deep. Anyway, this one was ebook and audiobook. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. It has 247 pages, and that is Don't Touch My Hair by Emma Dabiri, which was read by the author. Last month I read What White People Can Do Next by Emma Dabiri, which was her second release book. This one was the debut, and I've been wanting to get to this for ages.
I also see this gorgeous orange cover called Twisted, The Tangled History of Black Hair Culture, and I think this is the title it goes by in other countries, perhaps America, I'm not too sure, but I'm pretty sure they are the same book, if I am correct in that notion.
I kind of wish I stuck to my gut though and got the physical book, because I think it would have been so much better for me to really get into, because I ended up reading this for the whole month because I was reading it teeny tiny on my phone, and that's why I switched to the audiobook. And it would have been an amazing experience for me to tab bits and pieces, because I think I would have loved that. By the way, this was published in 2019 by Penguin, and it's adult non-fiction. But yes, I still had a great experience listening to her voice, because I listened to her other book, and I just, you know, the author knows best how they want something to make you feel, how they want the words to come across to you, and I feel like it was just an amazing experience hearing it. So yeah, basically it's what it says on the tin. Don't Touch My Hair is basically all these kind of conversations on black hair history, products, you know, the first black billionaire due to the hair industry, but also how colonized it is, because a lot of the time in the early days, mainly that is, it was all about straightening the hair and making it seem as Eurocentric as possible, as European as possible, and kind of the internal colonization and racism there. And it was just amazing. It was so good. So it had an awesome sort of encapsulation of all the times we can relate to people unsolicitedly touching our hair, as well as just an interesting history on the culture of hair in the black community as well, which I really enjoyed reading about. And my quote for this one is, "Until the late 1990s, being black and Irish in Ireland was to have been a unicorn." And I don't doubt that for a second. And then the last book I read was Where the Crawdads Sing by Delia Owens, and this was 368 pages, and I gave this a 5 out of 5 stars. I absolutely adored this book. It came out in 2019 by Corsair, and it's literary fiction adult. Everything that I talk about, I gave it 5 stars. I did see some controversy though about the author, so that's interesting. But the movie's coming out soon, and I'm so excited to get to it. I think it's coming out the 15th of July, and I'm so ready for it. This is another book that I felt like I was reading for the majority of the month. Well, for 2 months really, because I put it down at the beginning of the month to get through my buddy reads, and then I picked it back up at the very end, like the last 4 days of June. And I was like, nah, this has been sitting there for ages now. I need to just finish the book, and I'm so glad I did, because I really enjoyed it. We are following Kaya, who is the marsh girl. She lives alone in the marsh. You learn throughout her history, because you're basically following her as a child all the way till she grows up, that everyone that she's ever loved basically has abandoned her in some way or other, has hurt her in some way or another, and she tries to close off her heart and her mind to people, because all she's ever known from them is disappointment. But of course love finds a way, and she finds not only love in a platonic sense and love in a romantic sense, but she finds this motherly nurturing within the marsh and the wilderness around her, and nature itself is basically mothering her and teaching her the ways of the world and how to survive. And it's just so beautiful. The nature writing in this was amazing. The characters I absolutely adored. It was beautifully written, but it also felt like poetic, analytical, lyrical, all together. The characters and the landscape were absolutely fascinating, and it was just super engrossing. So again, because of that, I've got loads of quotes, but I've just picked one. Until at last, some unclaimed moment, the heart pain seeped away like water into sand, still there but deep. Beautiful. I'm so looking forward to the movie. Alright folks, that is it. Those are all the 18 books that I read in June, and I feel so good. Hopefully it doesn't burn me out with my reading, because now I've got the summer holiday and I should be able to read even more if possible, because I have some annual leave booked. But we shall see. I don't know, I might try and do some other hobbies. I don't really know. I feel like, do I even have any other hobbies at this point in my life now? I'm just so consumed by books and reading, I don't even know. But yes, thank you so much for watching. Let me know if you've read any of these books yourself, if they're on your TBR, on your mind, if you want to give them a go. And also let me know what your favourite book of the month and what your least favourite book of the month was. I would love to hear it. Anyway, have a great day, morning, afternoon, evening, whenever it is you're watching this. And I shall speak to you in another video soon. Bye!